Chapter 27. No More. In the British supply depot, as darkness came, Harry Moss's corpse awoke. He found his feet. He picked up his knob-carry mace and stuck the blood-crusted trench knife into his belt. Harry made his way among the crates, singing a half-remembered song from he could not say when. He thought it was a Babylonian ditty, but so many different tongues were speaking in his head that he could not say for sure. So he let it babble out of him and enjoyed hearing it bounce off the flagstones and up into the evening sky. He reached the stacks of artillery ammunition and stretched out a hand, caressing the shining brass shells, marveling at their smoothness, the beauty of their shape, and the possibilities inside of them. The girls in England would poison themselves to death, polishing them up inside and out, and filling them to the brim with gunpowder and shrapnel balls, would have blushed at the tactile joy their perfection engendered in Harry's corpse. Then, at last, before him stood his prize. The red and yellow bands made him think of a venomous snake he had seen in a blurry lifetime past. The black coat of arms was very familiar to him, with its rampant stag paramount over the shape of the helmet. Had he seen that heraldry on a shield he smashed with his bastard sword? Had it hung above his lord's table in the great hall, where the bannermen drank themselves past reason? He was not sure. Perhaps both. Yes, likely both, or neither. It did not matter now, and had not really mattered then. He reached out to the tap on the nearest gas cylinder and turned it. It hissed at him, just like the snake had, and then thick phosgene and chlorine gas belched and billowed out. It smelled like green corn in the field. He sneezed as the chlorine and phosgene filled his lungs and smiled at the ticklish feeling it gave his nose and throat. Harry's corpse went merrily down the line, turning the taps of all the gas canisters. The poison flowed out and pooled on the ground. When he had opened every one of them, he laid back in the gas and spread his arms and legs wide in a bizarre, unconscious mockery of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. The spirit inside of him flowed out too, escaping through Harry's grinning mouth and nose, as well as the wounds in his throat. It joined the gas, dispersing into the yellowy-green mist. Slowly at first, but then as smooth and liquid as the snake Harry's legion of memories had recalled, the gas coalesced and moved, following the plane of the ground, flowing around the crates and stacks of armaments, a new, modern beast slithering toward the exit of the depot, hunting. Rupert Fuchs leaned back in dismay after the first 30 hours of digging. Perhaps it would be better just to lie down and let the oxygen give way to pure carbon dioxide. It would be a slow death, but there were plenty of firearms should anyone want a quicker snuffing out. Digging into the earth was a simple chore. Move the displaced earth up and out. Likewise, digging laterally, once you were down there, was an easy feat. Simply move the earth back to the tunnel mouth, then haul it up and out. But digging out of your own grave was a living hell. Every ounce of earth you displaced from above buried you deeper in your final resting place. Every time you moved a square foot from the ceiling, you risked bringing the whole cavern down upon yourself. Yet it was not in Rupert Fuchs' nature to surrender to earth and mud. He was a born digger, and so he pressed on, digging and digging and digging, until his fingernails were gone, until the diesel at the generator must have run dry, and the light bulbs flickered into nothingness, until Captain Becker had to murder one of his own stormtroopers because he lost his nerve and started screaming. The murder happened toward the end, early on Sunday morning. Rupert climbed back up to take his turn in the chimney, sending earth and mud onto the 15 men below him. Other than the little circular assault flashlights the shock troops wore around their necks, which were dynamo-powered and only lit for 6 or 7 seconds when their cord was yanked, their sole source of constant light was a pair of battery-powered lanterns, but they were the last two, and the batteries on both were almost spent. When the one in the cavern below Rupert went dim, Private Gutenberger began screaming. Major Paul Becker found Gutenberger in the dark. His rough hands grabbed him, clapping over his mouth, trying to stifle the terror in him that was spreading into the nerves of all the survivors like wildfire and devouring their precious oxygen. But Gutenberger would not be calmed. Becker wrestled with him and felt for the handle of his Mauser machine pistol. He pulled it free, set it to Gutenberger's chin, and fired. The bang deafened them all temporarily. It silenced Gutenberger permanently. Rupert nearly fell when the pistol went off below him, but he clung to his perch, shored up his footing, and plowed ahead. Whatever had happened below meant nothing, because suddenly the earth was showering down from above. It was no longer heavy, thick, and solid. It was hollow and light and giving way, and yes! He broke through, and fresh night air exploded into the chimney. Yes! Yes! He screamed at the top of his lungs. We've made it! Captain Becker called up. You've reached the surface! Rupert got control of himself. Yes, sir. Give me a moment, he whispered down, remembering that they could not be more than 20 yards from the British lines. It would not do to survive being buried alive just to be shot in the face as he climbed to the surface. Carefully, Rupert opened the hole wide enough to provide himself a canal. He kicked his feet into the crevices in the chimney that he had dug out with his bloody fingers and eased his head up. A scattering of stars still twinkled in the blue sky of night. The moon had begun its descent. The sun had not yet begun its rise. The British parapets were a mere 20 yards distant. In the darkness, Rupert did not see any movement, no silhouettes of sentries. But that did not mean that no one was there. He whistled quietly and dropped the flashlight down to Hans Deal. Then his feet dug into the walls, and Rupert pushed and pulled his body out of the hole. He lay on his back and sucked in a deep breath of fresh air. Then he rolled back onto his stomach, leaned in, and whispered into the pit. Come up, but slowly and quietly. We are right at the British front line. Rupert scooted back from the hole and lay flat, waiting to help the next man up. He pulled out Hans Deal first, followed by Tedrick Christensen, then Tomas Larsen. Captain Becker followed Larsen up, then one after the other. The assault troops struggled and fought their way up to the surface and slid into hiding amongst the craters, gratefully gulping the fresh air and calming their shattered nerves. When the last two men were coming up the chimney, something odd happened. Rupert was lying over the top of the hole, reaching for Rolf Wieder's outstretched hand, when there was a cry from the bottommost man. The flashlight below went out, and Rupert heard the sounds of a struggle, followed by shrieks from the blackness. He got hold of Rolf's hand and began to pull him up, when out of nowhere, like a fisherman's bait being bit by a shark, Rolf was wrenched from his grasp. Rolf screamed out in terror as he fell into the pitch black. There was a brief pause and silence, then a series of wet, thudding sounds, as if blunt metal was striking flesh and bone. And then nothing. Rupert stared into the abyss. Then the cavern collapsed upon itself. Fortunately for Rupert, at the last moment, Captain Becker and Hans Deal grabbed him by his belt, dragging him back from the rubble before he was sucked in and consumed. Becker seized Rupert by the jacket and whispered sharply, What happened? What happened? Vida and Berger. I don't know. I don't know, shuddered out of Rupert. It had been a long 2 days. He did not want to know what had happened to them. He wanted to close his eyes and forget what he had heard, to forget his entire life. But there was no time for that. The sun would be up soon, and they could not be caught in the open in no man's land. Otherwise all the scratching, digging, and surviving would be for naught. Becker led the way. They stayed low but moved quickly. Rupert, Hans, and Tedric mimicked the experienced shock troops as best they could. About 30 yards from the German lines, Becker halted them. Surviving the cave-in, then escaping across the British no man's land, then getting a face full of German stick grenades would have been the ultimate irony. Captain Becker crawled forward alone and cried out softly, "Hello! We are comrades! We are comrades! Don't shoot for Christ's sake!" There was nothing but silence from the trenches. Becker half rose, then eased his way amongst the barbed wire entanglements. He was certain he would end up being shot by some goddamn frontline wretch, but there seemed no other choice, and he would never ask one of his subordinates to do this in his place. When he reached the German trenches, there was no one there. They were completely devoid of life. Becker climbed back onto the sandbags and whistled low. "Come, quickly now, we are almost home." When the last of the men dropped into the trenches and collapsed against the wall, spent, the sun began rising up over the eastern horizon. Rupert and Hans Deal gathered wet water and rations. The men devoured the repast and poured all the water their bellies could hold down their throats. Then they all lay in the trenches on the duckboards and slept. To a man, they were unwilling to venture into dugouts or bunkers. If the British were going to hit them with a barrage today, better to die under the blue sky than to crawl back into a cave. They slept in the open air, gloriously, as the warmth of dawn nourished their spent bodies and souls. They did not know it, but there would be no British barrage today, or ever again.